Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining the COVID Recovery, a Retail Turning Point, or Return to Status Quo with Ethan Chernovsky, VP of Marketing at Placer AI. As a reminder, if you have any questions throughout the conversation, to please submit them using the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. Here's your host, Stephen Winnick, Senior Analyst and Head of Innovators at CoreSite Research.
Thank you, Drew, and thank you all for joining for today's conversation. I'm excited to have Ethan here to discuss the future of retail and the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Ethan is VP of Marketing at Placer AI and loves helping businesses unlock the power of location analytics. Prior to Placer, Ethan was Director Corporate Marketing at SimilarWeb and Vice President of Headline Media. We've got a very exciting agenda planned today. Discuss the impact of the pandemic on retail brands. Ethan's going to be sharing some unprecedented data into consumer foot traffic and behaviors across retail sectors and locations. We'll be discussing different sectors and brands that are seeing short-term shifts and those that are experiencing more long-term foundational changes and impacts. We'll look at shopping behaviors to identify strategies that will ultimately drive success as we come out of this pandemic. And lastly, we'll discuss how retailers can implement more dynamic strategies to account for the new normal. So just before we get started, as we mentioned, we definitely encourage everyone to use the Q&A function to ask any questions throughout the webinar. We want this to be interactive, and we'll try to get to all of those either throughout our conversation or towards the end of the presentation. So just to get things started, we had retail sales come out this morning, and I wanted to just share some of that data, and then Ethan will jump into some of the foot traffic data and other consumer trends. So retail sales this morning showed that there was a 9% increase year over year for the month of June. And, we attribute this to pent up demand from March and April. So pretty encouraging numbers this morning. Non-store retailers, which represent virtually all online, were up a staggering 30%, which, we would say is offset by a 24% decline in clothing retailers, not too surprising, and a 12% decline in sales at department stores. Again, this is for the month of June, looking year over year. We saw sporting and leisure goods up 22% year over year. That's a very high number, and we'll get to this more in Ethan's slides. But we realize some of the foundational shifts. People that aren't going to gyms, they're buying more home equipment, they're buying more athleisure clothing. They're stuck at home, and there's no really a source of entertainment outside their home. So they're buying more, sporting and athleisure and equipment. We just saw the acquisition Lululemon made of Mirror, the on-demand workouts with an interactive mirror. So a lot of these trends that we'll talk more about during Ethan's presentation, we saw in this morning's sales report. We saw food retailers up 11%. Offset by a 27% decline in food services and drinking places. We're thinking on average, the U.S. consumers having 1 to 2 more meals at home. Hence the food service and drinking places down 27%. We think this is more of a short-term impact as restaurants slowly start to open across the country. And just wanted to give a quick recap. So if you just joined, this morning, U.S. Census Bureau put out retail sales for the month of June up 9% year over year. Pretty strong positive numbers there. Pent up demand, we believe, from March and April. And we'll get into some of the sectors and specific brands and retailers that are being impacted and what are some of the strategies they're doing as we come into this new retail normal. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Ethan to go through some of his presentation and discuss the agenda.
So, like we said, what we want to make sure we're discussing today is what's happened in this recovery period and what indicates that there's a fundamental shift in how retail has operated, what is likely just a short-term change that we'll see revert back quickly, and what is part of this wider evolutionary change that was taking place pre-COVID and will likely continue to take place post, but maybe may have been boosted by the unique factors of the pandemic and its recovery. But quickly, before we get into it, who is Placer and where does our data come from? So essentially, we see 30 million devices throughout the United States. Critically, this is all anonymized aggregate data. So it is GDPR and CCPA compliant. And that data comes into our system solely as a panel from which we can utilize AI, machine learning, and the most advanced data science practices to make predictions on traffic to any location anywhere in the United States. And by doing that, we can then aggregate up all of those locations up to have a chain level analysis to understand what's happening at that level, whether it's at a state, DMA, or nationwide. And then we present this data in a wide range of reports. Essentially, our core resource is location data, but with location data, you can understand the customer journey, you can understand when they're visiting, you can understand how those trends are changing, what are the cross-shopping patterns, and more. Critically, we love location analytics because we think it has some really unique advantages. One, it's cross-functional, so it's not just providing value to one element within an organization, but across an entire company. It's behavioral, so very often we see that people will fill out surveys of what they think they would do, and that isn't always aligned with what they are actually doing. It's real time, so our data is accurate up to 4 days ago, whenever that day may be. So it's constantly updating and giving that real time or that near real time visibility. And then again, because it's so granular, it's able to be built up into a whole wide range of reports. So whether it's a true trade area analysis, so as opposed to a simple radius around a location, showing the trade area for all of its amorphous glory. And then with that, understanding real demographics, understanding the customer journey, visit trends, cannibalization risks, void analysis, what routes people take to get to a specific location, and more. And then finally, in terms of accuracy and validation, we were chosen by M-Science as the most highly correlated location data provider with transaction data, which is obviously critical in the offline realm where those conversions are so much higher. And then just one quick shout out for the people who haven't been familiar, please check out our website, placer.ai. We have a free tool in a section called the Square, an industry trends tool, a brand tracker, and a brand dominance map that will be released in the coming days. So check it out if you're interested in learning more. But now to get to the content, the first place we wanted to look at was where are the biggest changes happening?
Thanks, Ethan. So this is a really interesting slide. We'll start with malls and outdoor centers. What are the primary changes you're seeing with outdoor centers compared to indoor malls? And what are some of the longer term ramifications when we look at these trends?
So I think the first thing we're seeing, and it's fairly expected, that you're going to see indoor centers further away from their normal than an outdoor center, because it's who are the tenants in these outdoor centers. They tend to orient themselves more towards essential retail. They're able to be open longer. A lot of these malls, even when they reopened, had very strict restrictions on how long they were open and what was open within them, which can mitigate how far one is willing to travel to go to the mall. And yet still, these are critical differences, but they highlight some of the things that malls do so well. So when you think about the magnitude of the visit that a mall attracts as opposed to an outdoor center, it's still so much longer. It's still so much a further distance than someone who's willing to go to an outdoor center. And that speaks to some of the potential changes that we could see in the market. And part of that is, where are we going to see retailers move? So a lot of the conversation in commercial real estate at the moment is, if I'm an outdoor center operator, how do I pull some of those retailers that had been indoor mall oriented outside? And I think we're going to see brands test that out. The other flip side of that is spaces are going to open up in malls, both with closures and because of some of this shift. And that's going to give an opportunity for brands that were either not offline at all or primarily oriented towards outdoor centers to test out different types of formats that could potentially work within an indoor environment. And so there is this really exciting moment happening now. And ultimately, there is a great likelihood that this diversification of what exists within a mall and what exists within an outdoor shopping center could create just a better retail environment overall.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing I'd like to point out too, in some of our consumer surveys is the fear factor of indoor versus outdoor, and how that may have attributed to outdoor centers. The consumer feels a bit more safer. So we might see some pent up demand. While we have seen some pent up demand in busier malls, I think in the short term, we're expecting outdoor centers to enjoy a little more traffic in the next, 6 to 12 months.
I think that's absolutely critical point.
And so staying on the topic of malls, there's been, a lot of narrative in offline retail that centers around the struggles of indoor malls and how difficult the recovery will be for them. So in your opinion, and what you've seen in terms of the data, the traffic data, do malls recover? And if so, what does that recovery period look like?
So I think the short answer is, I think yes. Like the mall sector provides something really unique. I think what we sometimes mix up with this narrative is the fact that it's going to be different as opposed to it's going to be worse or not existent. And when you think of some of the innovative ideas taking place in malls, both repurposing department centers to larger kind of food and entertainment options, to bringing in new types of retailers into the mall environment, and even, my favorite is co-working within malls. And especially when you think of those B or C class malls, they're always going to struggle more to compete with that top level. How do you utilize your space in a more effective way? If I have an ongoing audience that's coming daily in terms of coming to work, and then I can be the place where they eat, and I can be the place where they exercise, and the place where they pick up certain types of goods, I think this shift in mentality in malls is going to be hugely important. And again, the biggest element for us is, what is that new mall going to look like? Because, any kid who grew up in a suburb in the US knows that if you drove 20 minutes one way, you found a mall with a very similar makeup. And if you drove 20 minutes the other way, you found the same kind of situation. And it was very copy and paste. And this idea that we can now have malls with fundamentally different vibes, fundamentally different experiences and retailers within them, that's going to create a more diversified environment where I can go to one mall one weekend, the next, and have a fundamentally different experience that makes each one exciting and targeted towards a specific audience.
And just looking at, if we go back to that slide, just looking at some of the traffic trends there, obviously we're not going to expect 50 to 60% year over year decreases in traffic. From our point of view, the consumer still craves these in-person experiences, and they want to go out and have these social experiences and still touch and feel the product and shop at stores in a mall environment. So we're predicting by the end of this year traffic to be around down 10%. Do you guys have any thoughts or hypothesis on where you expect the year to end?
I think if anything, if COVID has taught us anything, it's that trend-wise you can have a feel for it, but to predict numbers is, it's you're throwing ideas out. Our expectation is that as the pandemic comes under greater levels of control, we'll see traffic's coming closer and closer to normal, and that as as we lose control of the pandemic, it's going to be harder to see those numbers rise back.
Of course, yeah. The uncertainty makes it very difficult to make those predictions. All we can hope for is that the cases will start minimizing and these stores and malls keep reopening. So moving on to traditional grocers, Placer AI has seen some of the top brands like Trader Joe's, Whole Foods struggle while Albertsons and Kroger are thriving. Is this a trend that sticks? And if so, why?
So I think the answer is yes. And I think there's a few things at play, especially when you think the next year. So when you think about, what separates Albertsons or, Kroger from a Whole Foods or Trader Joe's, they're a traditional grocer that we trust. We can go in and accomplish 90% of our grocery needs within one location. The same is not true of those other brands, and they're getting hurt as a result. So we have data that shows that Trader Joe's locations in Florida, however much we love Trader Joe's, 10% of Trader Joe's visitors in the state of Florida will visit a Publix on the same day. And this was the last 6 months of 2019, which means that I go to Publix, I get eggs, I get milk, I get meat, I get my core. And then I go to Trader Joe's because they have a range of items that I love there that I can't get anywhere else. And that's a really valuable asset for Trader Joe's. But in a situation like this, where we're so much more mission driven in our shopping, that's going to have an impact. And Whole Foods, it's, their geographic orientation, they're more expensive. So they're oriented towards cities, which there's been this kind of exodus from cities, even if it's just universities and lack of business travel and the like. They're more expensive in a period of economic uncertainty. And they already had a much lower regularity of visits from a single visitor. So when we look at customer loyalty scores, they were almost half of what a Publix would see. And so these are the types of brands that are going to feel it more over the next 12 months, when even if things go very well, we're still going to be in this period of extended uncertainty, extended lack of business travel, extended, economic challenges. And so we do believe that these kind of classic grocers are going to see an ongoing boost in the coming months and year.
That makes a lot of sense. Any comments on how they could channel innovation?
Yeah, I think curbside pickup, micro fulfillment, these are all critical elements for how grocery is going. I think it's all about context. So we looked at online data and offline data in coordination, working on something with a report with SimilarWeb. And we found that globally, you would see online ordering of grocery jump, 200% in those first few weeks of the crisis, but then very quickly drop back down to, 50% growth. And we think of how small the online element was of the grocery experience, it's still, even 200% growth was wonderful, but it's still a small piece of the pie overall. So I think these brands need to channel innovation, but they need to also be thinking about, how do I make the experience easy? How do I get people the products they want? How do I make it so that once you do an order, in theory, I can deliver it to your home? Or you've done an order, the next time you can copy and paste that order and do most of it, online, or just shrink down the amount of time you have to spend in the store. But there's so much room for innovation, even while recognizing how critical the offline experience is to the overall shopping and grocery.
I think that's a great segue to our next sector. We look at office supplies, and we've seen a lot of this move online. So the question is, how can an Office Depot, a Staples, and Best Buy fend off their online competitors? Are there additional services they can offer? You mentioned BOPIS, curbside. What are some strategies that you can suggest, recommend for some of these traditional players that are majority of their sales are taking place in store?
Yeah, I mean, I think critically, office supplies was a sector that every time we looked at it pre-pandemic, it was just consistently dropping. So almost ongoing year-over-year decreases, except for the back-to-school season late last year, which did give some of them a little bit of a boost. But the numbers that they were seeing in late June in terms of year-over-year declines were similar to what they were seeing in January pre-pandemic. So it was actually, not this horrible situation. And in fact, our work from home has taught us how important some of these elements are, and we need to have those relationships. So I think it's we included Best Buy here for a reason, because I think that is a model that these brands need to be looking at. So how do I make it that the in-store experience provides something other than just a place to buy? How do I have kind of that Geek Squad style offering that means I can come in and help you set up the things that you bought and optimize the way you're utilizing your space? But this is, I think, a unique moment in time where the brands like Staples and Office Depot are either going to find another gear and they're going to surge back into prominence, or we're going to look back on this and say they couldn't capture this moment, and that's the reason that, unfortunately, they continue to struggle.
So it sounds like they have to be more service driven in their store experience. So if we look at home improvement, going to the next part here, just going back to the retail sales numbers this morning, I mentioned up 9% in the month of June, year over year. Home improvement is up 23%. We all understand, in part, people are staying at home. They need office supplies. They're updating certain aspects of their homes, but also we're seeing professional contractors going back to work. So I think that's driving a lot of sales. So Lowe's, Home Depot, and others have surged to levels that have beaten out anything we've seen in recent years. Can this success be maintained, and what's the concern with how much they've outperformed?
So I think the concern is, have they done so well that we're going to lose context of what normal performance looks like? So when we look at, how often do we look at year over year data? And then there are times that you forget. I'll give you a great example. There's a mall in California that did a Kim Kardashian pop-up over a 4-month period, and their traffic exploded. And the next year, someone was talking about their data in an external media source and talking about how things were declining. They weren't declining. They were doing well. And if you would compare it to what a normal pattern of growth would look like, they were doing exceptionally well. But when compared to a spike, we kind of forget why that spike happened and then judge them accordingly. So I think the concern with home improvement is they're performing so incredibly well that there is this perfect storm of things going in Lowe's, Home Depot, and even, the Bed Bath and Beyonds of the world's favor, that in a year from now, we need to keep that context in mind, because if they don't match those numbers, it's not because they're not strong or not doing well. It's because this was, again, this perfect lightning in a bottle moment for that sector.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think we need to minimize some of the expectations going forward, probably in the longer term, but also understand there's probably some stickiness here with consumers wanting to invest in their homes that we saw pre-COVID. So I think that's a great point. If we look at opportunities that remain with so many competitors in different sectors across brands and some difficult times out there, we've seen bankruptcies and store closures going up. What can brands do to emerge even stronger from this?
So I think it's this is one of the areas where we work very closely with our retail customers to understand what's happening on the ground in reality. So what you're seeing on this slide is a true trade area in California, and it's the true trade area of a Pier 1. And the red, green, and yellow dots are a Lowe's, Target, and Bed Bath & Beyond. And clearly there's an overlap between all of those brands and the services they provide when you think about the Venn diagram with a Pier 1. And so a lot of these brands, what they're doing is saying, all right, this is my target market. This is how, on a location by location basis, I'm going to go and reach out and figure out how I can be the brand that fills the vacuum being created by a Pier 1. And so even when you look at a sector like that, as well as they're doing, and even with the caution that we just discussed, there is a potential for a lot of sectors to find another gear because of COVID related closures. Now, clearly, a brand that's closing now, it wasn't like they were doing incredibly well in January and just COVID came and that's it. It was usually they were having some struggles, but this clearly hastened the pace of that. And I think that's a really significant element for so many of these brands to be aware of.
And just pausing there, because we have a lot of Q&A coming in from the audience. One of the questions that just came in is, how, in your opinion, will a potential second wave impact retail recovery?
I mean, I think it's we're going to. No, totally. I think we kind of saw some things that we know, and we'll certainly be surprised by other elements, but expect the Home Depots and Lowe's to still succeed. They're essential retail. They're not closing. And if we're in our houses longer, all the more so time for another project. Expect the Dick's Sporting Goods, the Nikes of the world to see that surge because we're prepping for being without our gym for even longer. Fast food, I think we got this look at how does a consumer react when they're worried about being at home for a long period of time. And now that will be exacerbated by the fact that we already know what it's like to be at home for a long time. So our stock up mentality is going to be a little bit wider. And so I think we will see what we saw before, potentially with a little extra on top.
That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Ethan. So if we move ahead here and we look at Starbucks and Dunkin', many fast food players are still closed, and some that are open don't have the same level of assortment. Starbucks is launching new models for pickup only, and both them and Dunkin' were hit very hard by the pandemic. So is there a long-term concern for their overall brand health?
I mean, not for me. There's nothing that we've seen that says, wow, these brands are in trouble. And I would say that, what you're seeing on the slide is actually the time of visit distribution compared with looking at May through early July 2019 versus that same period in 2020. And what becomes evident is that our patterns changed because we're not going to work as often. And Starbucks and Dunkin' have heavy presences in major cities, and they're a big part of our dropped off the kids at school, and now I'm going to go get myself a coffee. Or on our way to work, we're going to pick up the Frappuccino that we love to start off our day. And it's so critically part of that routine that when the routine gets completely upended, obviously they're going to see a decline. And so I think my expectation, or our expectation at this stage, when we look at the data, we have a deeper piece on this actually coming next week, of we think that they're actually showing all the reasons to return back to quote unquote normal fairly quickly. And even while, in the last week or so, as COVID has surged again in so many states, we have seen certain players in the food space dip back down after seeing growth. And that's not the case for Dunkin' and Starbucks. So they were so thrown off their rhythm that it feels like there's very little that could stop a strong comeback, at least continuing for the next few weeks.
Mm-hmm. And just to go off that point, I think the Starbucks, the Shake Shacks, Domino's, they're going to be okay. They're going to come out of this, and already you're seeing some growth. But then, if we look at the mom and pop, your local pizzerias that are, specifically maybe in your urban office settings, I think those companies, those restaurants, fast food type environments might see a longer term impact here, whether they even reopen. So I think those are the bigger concerns for at least what we're seeing at Corsight.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. We move to fitness, very interesting category. The consumers, we've essentially left the gym, and many have embraced digital health solutions, online streaming classes. I mentioned Lululemon's acquisition of Mirror. So what's your take on what the next case is for offline fitness to rebound?
So I still expect there to be a strong rebound. And there's a few reasons why. Like, obviously, the overall sector is down. Like, it's not doing incredibly well. We're not seeing this rapid return. But I think there's a few things that are happening that are really interesting. So one, the people who are returning are going back to quote unquote normal visits. So what we're showing you is from one of the states that had reopened, we're showing you that visits actually returned. Those who were returning, the visit duration went back to almost exactly what it was. And the biggest thing that has shifted is where the people are coming from. So if I chose a gym because it was right next to my work and I'm not going to work now, yeah, the gym is going to suffer. If I chose to go to a gym and I have the ability to go back, essentially we're seeing people go back. So the real question, I think, in the fitness sector is, and also, by the way, think about how many gyms are closing. So, Gold's is announcing dozens of locations closing, and 24 Hour Fitness is announced that they're going to be closing. I think it was over 120. And so when you take that into those who are able to kind of survive this period, I think are going to be a unique situation. The only thing I would say is that a lot of brands missed the window here to develop a relationship outside of the location. So we all went to a gym. We love the trainer that's there at the time we go to. He or she helps us with certain types of exercises. We love the class we go to. If you took advantage of this time to maintain that relationship, I feel like there's a lot of reasons for confidence that that audience is going to come back. If you didn't, I think you have taken a risk that you should not have taken.
That's a great point. And moving to D2C, pre-COVID, a lot of digitally native companies, Bonobos, Warby Parker, Casper, were continuously expanding their offline footprint. The pandemic has showed us, though, the value of online strength. Why would brands come offline more coming out if they see the power of their digital reach? Do you expect the COVID trend to continue? And what would be your message?
Yes, I think one of the biggest things we talk about, and we talk about it regularly, is that we lump direct to consumer and product oriented companies together, and maybe there are clearly differences, but there's also a lot of similarities. So when you look at Nike announcing 200 more stores, Levi's announcing 100 plus more stores as wholesale declines as a part of their business, Puma launching their real offline presence, and Under Armour doing much better than many expected. Lululemon is a great example. Owning the relationship with the customer becomes so critically important. Also, we've seen, what we're showing you in this slide is an Everlane location in New York. Look how far people are coming to that Everlane location. The idea that a CEO who just a year ago said the secret of online only is that it's not profitable, looking how successful some of these companies have been, the idea that we expect that to stop because of COVID is I think it's problematic at best. I think the higher likelihood is that we're going to see a unique environment created where real estate costs drop because you're going to see a lot of brands closing and spaces open up. And that this there is a many vacuums created, and there's also this loss of a lot of department store locations. So the need to have that direct relationship and the opportunity to create that direct relationship dovetail and create a powerful opportunity. And as a result, whether it's launching through companies like Neighborhood Goods, or a brandless style option, or having their own locations, this is a trend we expect to continue and in fact pick up pace post-pandemic.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think consumers still want to touch, feel, and see the product, especially of the digitally native brand. I think it might be constrained in this current environment as they can't, try things on. Stores have limited capacity in terms of how many people they can let in. But I think this consumer psyche is going to stay, and hence there will be a demand for these offline experiences, and we will consider to see D2Cs continue to open stores. Just want to bring in also a question that was asked just now by the audience. Are retailers, leveraging AI to better understand, clusters to prioritize the reopening? How are they leveraging the technology to understand, what locations should they be prioritizing? And if they don't have a store presence, maybe this is a location I should be considering.
100%. I mean, I'd say that is the reason that so many of the retailers that work with us started, was how do I pick the ideal location? When a location isn't working, how do I figure out where to move it? How do I understand why locations, A, B, and C in Arizona are doing incredibly well, why D, E, and F are doing terribly? And figuring out that menu of what I'm looking for in an area that's going to support a really successful location. I think it's such an important question. And I think it goes even beyond COVID. And it's an example we love to tell. But last year in about June or July, Walmart announced that they were closing 2 supercenters, and I think all of us rightfully lost our mind, because we're like, if Walmart's closing stores, we might as well just give up on offline retail. And when we looked at it from a data perspective, what we saw was they weren't closing them because these stores were underperforming. There was just tremendous trade area overlap. And we realized that they could serve the same audience with less locations. And it was an optimization play. And it was brilliant. And I think this is something that we're going to see a lot more with really successful brands, that, company X is closing 50 stores around the country. And it's not because they're struggling. It's just because they can do the same damage with less locations. And that's the type of approach that's going to create this space that a lot of these direct to consumer and product companies are going to come into. And again, ultimately, and this is the biggest part of it, the more diversity there is in retail, the more diversity there is in every shopping center and every mall. And that's what's going to make consumers want to go to multiple places, as opposed to taking, one mall trip a month. I'll do 2, because the experience I'm going to get at the Aventura Mall is going to be so fundamentally different from the one I'm going to get at Bal Harbour Shops.
That's a great point. And this actually is a good segue. You mentioned it's not just D2C. Mentioned Nike, Levi's that are expanding their offline presence. We kind of touched on this. I don't know if you wanted to add any more comments as to why.
I mean, we could. I'm happy to do a whole other webinar of 45 minutes about why I love Nike, and and I think if you were bullish on Nike before, and I was one of those people, you should be even more bullish now, because look at where their cross shopping is. Their cross shopping is with department stores that are closing. Their online cross shopping was with Amazon, and they closed it. What Nike has realized is what so many other product companies are going to realize, which is you must own the relationship with your audience. And if it's online, if it's offline, it doesn't mean only, it doesn't mean don't have partners, but it means that you have to have those places where I can have a unique Nike experience and feel connected to the brand.
So let's talk about mass merchandise. Mass has benefited because they sell food, so they're considered essential. While the mix has changed and has been heavily weighted towards food in terms of sales, I think there will be some stickiness that will stay with the consumer, and the likes of Walmart and Target will likely benefit from this. So it's hardly a bold statement to say that Target and Walmart are powerful retailers. But is there a reason to be even more confident that this will likely be a more permanent trend?
Yes, I mean, first of all, I think what Target does in terms of focusing their merchandising on a per location basis is brilliant, and it's going to something that smart brands are going to take on. what Walmart is doing from an innovative perspective, from an innovation perspective, their ability to roll out so many different ideas so quickly is tremendous. Their health idea, I think, is the game changer. Forget competing with Amazon with some sort of kind of membership service. The health play I think it's a game changer for them. But even brands that tier after them, the Dick's Sporting Goods, look how strong they have been growing, how their year-over-year growth month after month has been up. Costco's the same. And you think what they offer is this ability to get so much done in one place, but you have a relationship with the brand, and that's so critical. I think the added thing here that I want to mention is that there's a lot of reason to grow our respect for brands like Walmart and Target, because you heard talk of some brands that weren't as good about social distancing or others that were better. And the lines they took in terms of creating self-imposed restrictions during the crisis, even though they were open and they could have turned it into an even greater boon for them, I think speaks to a lot to the power of corporate social responsibility.
You mentioned one point that's really interesting. We just actually at Coresight republished our 2020 Retail Trends Outlook. And one of the things we mentioned is the consumerization of health and healthcare. Walmart launched their own standalone clinics. CVS, Rite Aid doing the same thing. I believe CVS is even adding a wellness room in one of their larger clinics to host yoga classes. So in terms of the health, is that something that you see as a bigger trend in these offline locations?
Yes. I think what the genius of health, and even classes, you think like yoga classes like Lululemon, like why does this stuff make so much sense? It's not just the added revenue. It's not just that these guys already have the built-in relationship, especially I think CVS or Walgreens, it's around health. It's the fact that it's off-peak times. So if I'm CVS and I know that between 8 and 10 a.m. I see a big surge, and then between 4 and 7 p.m. I see a big surge. But now I can schedule people in those other hours. It's augmenting, it's bringing strength to an area of quote unquote weakness. And that's what I think goes unmissed, but is so critical to this picture of that it's scheduled. And so you can do it at times. And if I go into a CVS, I have never walked into a CVS or probably a Walgreens in my life and not ended up with 3 or 4 things that I didn't plan on getting. And so if I go in to get this health check, I'm going to get shampoo or deodorant, or, if I'm being terrible, I'm going to get one of those double, Milky Way bars. But it's always, that is the piece of it that's so important. Think about the same concept for Best Buy. The idea of setting a time in advance to come in and speak with a specialist about products or about issues you're having. These are areas that I think are so smart by these brands, and there's so many other values than just the added revenue stream.
I think that's a great point. And one big takeaway we've seen is during this period, this pandemic, that consumers' values have changed, and they want these brands and retailers that represent those values, whether it's health and wellness, whether it's sustainability, whether it's social justice. So I think coming out of this, we're going to see more of these companies, whether Walmart, Rite Aid, CVS, that are introducing these health-focused wellness areas, or more corporate responsibility, and consumers holding them to that. So I think that is definitely a growing trend, and we'll see strength at retailers that adjust their strategies accordingly.
Completely.
And so moving on to the off-price, a lot of these companies barely have e-commerce, and the pandemic was supposed to drive visits down because of consumer concerns, yet the sector seems to be continuing to show signs of strength. What are your thoughts on that? Will they continue to thrive and show this type of strength?
I think yes, of course. Their model works. You can get something if you go to a Marshalls or a Burlington or a TJ Maxx, and you find something great, and it's half the price that you get it somewhere else. You're gonna go back a lot of times because there's this experience to it of the treasure hunt, which maybe I enjoy slightly less, but a lot of people do like that idea that I'm gonna go see what I can find, and let's see where this adventure takes us. But I also think critically, when we talk about e-commerce for these brands, we have a tendency to say, how dare you not have e-commerce? Whereas I think they're being really smart of saying, we need to do e-commerce our way. Like Burlington e-commerce can't be the same as Calvin Klein e-commerce. it has to represent the Burlington brand. It has to understand the Burlington consumer. And so I'm excited. I don't think these brands are not going to go digital. I just think they're going to go digital in a way that suits them and feels authentic to the experience they want to provide.
So that makes a lot of sense, Ethan. We had a question come in, within the off-price retail segment, how and or will customer buying patterns change? I in my opinion, in the near term, I think as long as consumers are still at home, I think we will see a shift towards more athleisure. So I think in the near term, the need for off-price clothing will suffer. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think there will be a recovery in the medium to longer term. But in the short term, as long as consumers are still at home, the athleisure category will thrive. But what are your thoughts on the off-price retail segment? How and will it change?
I love athleisure. I do think off-price is going to do very well, though, because I think there's a few things going in its favor. If we knew 100% there was no school in September, there was no university in September or October, I think it would get hit just because of its seasonal peak in August. They generally see that really strong period. And so even if it doesn't mean that we've lost our love for off-price, but if that gets extended, there could be a pain felt as we kind of recalibrate when do we go. But I think the shopper that loves TJ Maxx or Burlington loves it because they know there's like a deal to be found and they like looking for that deal. I think now the deal to be found is going to be even better than ever. And so when we looked at specific TJ Maxx locations when they opened, they were massive year-over-year growth. And they were trying to limit people coming into stores. And so I would feel very, very confident in these brands in the next 6 to 12 months, but I see nothing that, realistically slows them down over time.
Great. We only have a few minutes here and we have about 18 questions from the audience. So let's try to get to a few of these here as we wrap up. And thank you for sharing all of that data. I believe we'll be sharing the recording both on Placer AI and CoreSite's website following. So just an interesting question came in here. How can retailers optimize the need for local adjustments in their operations, demand, marketing amid this changing COVID landscape where every state by state can look drastically different and demand can look different as well?
So I think there's three pieces to this, and forgive me for being a data person and coming from a data company, but that is the perspective. I love it, but you need to understand what's happening in each of these locations at a wider level. So it's not just a one store, because one store can always be impacted by confounding factors. But looking at that state level or regional level, but then also looking at the competitors on those state and regional levels to understand, is it your brand? Is it something you're doing wrong? Or is it your sector? Or is it the types of shopping centers you're in? And so a lot of these, there's so many layers to that question that critically it's the ability to try and dive into something, as quickly as you can, and then unpack elements of that to figure out how are things moving? What of it is changes that I need to make? And what of it is I just need to kind of, weather the storm.
And talking about, planning ahead, if we think about holiday, what percentage of sales do you think will be online, or what can retailers do to prepare for the holiday season?
There's two massive variables. Massive variable number one is COVID, right? Massive variable number two is, when is Prime Day? So if Prime Day hits November 1st, how does that impact Black Friday? And it might have a huge impact. If it hits later on, obviously it will. So I think those two elements are really important to track to try and understand what's happening within those sectors. Online is clearly going to have a big play, but look, take Prime Day as an example. We saw some of the biggest brands last year's Prime Day starting to generate more and more value offline. And that includes Whole Foods, which is an Amazon entity, but includes Walmart, Target, Best Buy, recognizing that this excitement being generated by the behemoth that is Amazon is something that they can leverage to their own advantage as well.
I think that's a great point. Someone just wrote, do you think in-person shopping will ever be the same again?
Yeah. I mean, all right, this is what I said at the beginning of the crisis was, I mean, if you remember post 9/11, we said travel is never going to be the same again. And we were right. It was never the same. Security was different. We have different expectations. We're willing to put up with more. We have to arrive at the airport earlier. But we still travel, and we were traveling more than ever before. So yes, things are going to be different. There's going to, for the next few years, is COVID back is going to be a headline that you're going to see in some media outlet, and it's going to scare people. But are we going to return? Absolutely. I just think you might see masks become a more constant part of the equation. Deeper cleaning services be a more distinct part of the conversation. But I think the short answer is absolutely yes.
Awesome. Great. Just at our timing here. So, what an incredible discussion. Thank you so much, Ethan, for joining us and sharing that data. And for everyone that tuned in, I hope you found the discussion insightful and fruitful. We hope to see everyone on our next CoreSite discussion with SVP of Li and Feng next Thursday at 10 a.m. We'll be discussing challenges and opportunity in the apparel supply chain and what lies ahead for the future of retail. As a reminder, all of these webinars and the recordings will be made available through both Placer and CoreSite's website for you to rewatch. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ethan. And hope to see you next time.
Thanks so much, Steven. It was great to be here.